The Thracians were an ancient tribal people who inhabited a large part of the Balkan Peninsula. They were known for their prowess in battle, their fierce independent spirit, and their enigmatic religious beliefs. Despite living on the fringes of the quote-unquote civilized world, they played an important role in shaping the course of history. In this video, we will explore the history and culture of the Thracian people, delving into many fascinating aspects of their civilization. During the late Neolithic period, the region of Thrace was already home to settled farming communities who cultivated the land and raised animals. By the early Bronze Age, these communities had developed more sophisticated settlements and distinct cultural traits. Over time, the mixing of these indigenous populations with Indo-European groups migrating south of the Danube gave rise to the people later known as the Thracians. The name Thracians is an exonym derived from the Greek word Thraces. What the Thracians called themselves or whether they even had a collective name remains unknown. Indeed, it is unclear if they saw themselves as a single people, as the Thracians were divided into hundreds of tribes, each led by its own chieftain. Their way of life and cultural practices differed across the region, influenced by geography, from mountain settlements to lowland plains, and from the north to the south. Despite regional differences, the Thracians shared some unifying traits, the most significant of which was their language. Unfortunately, the Thracians were largely non-literate and left behind almost no written records. What little is known of their language comes from a handful of Thracian words and inscriptions written by Thracians themselves using the Greek alphabet. From these fragments, linguists have concluded that Thracian belonged to the Indo-European language family. Another defining feature of Thracian society was that it was largely non-urbanized. Most people lived in small settlements built of wood or stone, while local chieftains and nobles resided in fortified hilltop strongholds. Our knowledge of the Thracians comes from two main sources. The first consists of the writings of foreign authors, primarily Greek and Roman. Among the Greeks, historians and geographers such as Thucydides, Xenophon, Pausanias, and Strabo describe the Thracians in varying detail, though the most comprehensive account comes from Herodotus. From the Roman world, an important perspective is offered by the poet Ovid, who was exiled by Emperor Augustus to the city of Tomis on the Black Sea coast. The second source is archaeology. Although Thracian settlements were relatively few, hundreds of richly furnished tombs have been excavated, revealing a remarkable wealth of artifacts. In order to understand Thracian history, it is essential to take into account the surrounding peoples, whose interactions with the Thracians influenced their culture and way of life. To the north were the Getae and the Dacians, tribal peoples who spoke a language now known as Ghetto-Dacian and very closely related to the Thracian language. To the northeast were the Scythians, nomadic horse riders who primarily herded livestock across the steppe. West of the Thracians were the Paeonians, so culturally similar that some ancient authors classified them as Thracians, though their language and tribal structures were different. Further west were the Illyrians, another well-known tribal people skilled in warfare, inhabiting both the mountains and the coasts. To the south were the Greeks, with whom the Thracians had frequent contact. They would eventually become deeply involved in Greek warfare and culture. Finally, the Bithynians, a Thracian tribe that migrated to Anatolia during the Bronze Age collapse, neighbored the Greeks as well as the Phrygians, Mysians, and Paphlagonians. The Thracians make their first appearance in written records in Homer's Iliad. Although the events of the Trojan War occurred centuries earlier, Homer, writing in the 8th century BC, blends Bronze Age history with details familiar to his own time. In the epic, the Thracians are mentioned briefly as allies of the Trojans. Homer describes them as possessing the finest horses and wearing magnificent, gleaming armor. Between the 8th and 6th centuries BC, the Greeks established many colonies in the region. They founded cities in locations that facilitated control over sea trade and served as hubs for agriculture and metallurgy, capitalizing on Thrace's abundant metal resources. While conflicts between the Greeks and the Thracians were frequent, the Greeks gradually established a strong coastal presence and developed trade relationships with the tribes further inland. In the late 6th century BC, the Achaemenid Persians under Darius I crossed the Sea of Marmara and invaded Thrace. Although they subdued many tribes, the region was never fully conquered or pacified, achieving only limited status as a satrapy. The Persians called this territory Scudra and referred to its inhabitants as Scudrians. Despite their incomplete control, thousands of Thracians were later conscripted by Darius and Xerxes to fight against the Greek city-states during the Greco-Persian Wars. At this time, we begin to gain reliable insights into the Thracians and their way of life through the accounts of Herodotus, who documented the Greco-Persian Wars. While he does not devote an entire book to the Thracians as he does for the Persians or Egyptians, his writings still provide valuable information about them. It is important to remember, however, that his account reflects Greek perspectives and must be interpreted accordingly. Herodotus writes, "The Thracians who live above the Crestonians observe the following customs. Each man among them has several wives, and no sooner does a man die than a sharp contest ensues among the wives upon the question which of them all the husband loved most tenderly. The friends of each eagerly plead on her behalf, and she to whom the honor is adjudged, after receiving the praises both of men and women, is slain over the grave by the hand of her next of kin, and then buried with her husband. The others are sorely grieved, for nothing is considered such a disgrace." The Thracians who do not belong to these tribes have the customs which follow. They sell their children to traders. On their maidens they keep no watch, but leave them altogether free, while on the conduct of their wives they keep a most strict watch. Brides are purchased of their parents for large sums of money. Tattooing among them marks noble birth, and the want of it low birth. To be idle is accounted the most honourable thing, and to be a tiller of the ground the most dishonourable. To live by war and plunder is of all things the most glorious. These are the most remarkable of their customs. After repelling the Second Persian invasion, the Greeks went on the offensive against the Achaemenid Empire. Athens led the formation of the Delian League, an alliance that eventually grew to include hundreds of city-states. Together, they waged campaigns against the Persians on both land and sea, striving to secure the independence of all Greek city-states. Fighting also extended to regions such as Anatolia and Thrace, and by 476 BC, the Persians had been completely expelled from Thrace. Around 460, the Odrysae, one of the most powerful Thracian tribes known for their exceptional horsemanship, established their own kingdom under their chieftain Tyrrhes I. Tyrrhes was a brilliant leader and military commander, and he successfully expanded the kingdom's territory by conquering most of the Thracian tribes. He died in 445 BC, likely in battle against the Triballi tribe, and was succeeded by his firstborn son, Sparadocus. After Sparadocus' death in 431 BC, leadership passed to his brother Sitalkes, who further expanded the kingdom, drawing substantial wealth from local metal mines and collecting tribute from both Thracian tribes and Greek coastal cities. Throughout the 5th century BC, the Athenians sent several armies to establish settlements at the mouth of the Strymon River, aiming to exploit the rich gold and silver mines of Mount Pangaeon. Although they initially failed, in 437 BC they finally defeated the Thracian tribe of the Edoni and founded the city of Amphipolis, establishing a strong Athenian foothold on the borders of Macedonia and Thrace. In 431 BC, rising tensions between the Delian League led by Athens and the Peloponnesian League led by Sparta culminated in a full-scale conflict known as the Peloponnesian War. The conflict lasted for decades and brought widespread devastation to the Greek world. According to the Athenian general and historian Thucydides, early in the war, Athens secured an alliance with Sitalkes. Meanwhile, Macedonia under King Perdiccas II, initially aligned with Athens, defected to Sparta, and several independent cities in the Chalkidiki Peninsula revolted against Athenian control. At Athens' urging, Sitalkes reportedly rallied an army of 150,000 Thracians who swept into Macedonia and Chalkidiki like locusts, ravaging the countryside and besieging cities. However, Athens failed to provide naval support, and Sitalkes' forces soon ran short on supplies. According to Thucydides, Perdiccas bribed Sitalkes' nephew Seuthes to persuade the king to abandon the campaign. After only 30 days, the Thracian army withdrew back to their homeland. Throughout the remainder of the conflict, various Thracian tribes, both independent and those under Odrysian rule, supplied mercenaries to different Greek factions. As a result, Thracian warriors became a familiar presence across the Greek world. In Athens, the combined influence of these mercenaries and the Thracian slaves brought to the city during earlier conflicts fostered significant cultural exchange. Sitalkes was eventually killed in 424 BC in a battle against the Tribali. He was succeeded by his nephew, Seuthes I. Seuthes largely avoided involvement in the Peloponnesian War and died in 411 BC. After his death, the kingdom appears to have deteriorated due to rivalries among competing heirs. From what we know, there was no clear hereditary succession. The throne went to whoever was deemed most capable, which sparked a major conflict. The kingdom lost much of its territory and was divided between two factions. During his long journey home from Persia, the Athenian general and philosopher Xenophon passed through Thrace in the winter of 400 and 399 BC. He recorded that at that time, the two rival kings were Amadocus I and Seuthes II. Xenophon and his mercenaries were employed by Seuthes, but after being left unpaid, they eventually departed. Later, through the intervention of the Athenians under General Thrasybulos, the two kings were reconciled and the kingdom was reunited as an ally of Athens. Amadocus died in 390 BC, and the matter of succession once again gave rise to disputes among rival claimants. In 384 BC, Cotys I ascended to the throne and reunited the kingdom. An ally of Athens, he married the daughter of the Athenian general Iphicrates and was named an honorary Athenian citizen. Cotys employed a substantial number of Greek mercenaries in his army. As Athens grew stronger through the Second Athenian League, relations began to sour. Cotys saw the League as a threat to his plans for expansion, and the Athenians in turn saw him as too ambitious. In 376 BC, an army of 30,000 Tribali passed through Odrysian territory unopposed, and probably with the blessings of Cotys, and laid siege to the Athenian allied cities of Abdera and Maronia. In Abdera, the siege was brutal. Both sides suffered losses, but the Abderites were at a severe disadvantage until the Athenian general Chabrias arrived and drove the invaders away. In Maronia, Chabrias secured a peace treaty and brought the Tribali into alliance with Athens. Meanwhile, Cotys seized this moment to expand into the Chersonese, successfully claiming parts of it, including the city of Sestos. However, a Thracian commander and prince, Miltiades, revolted, seizing the treasury and raising a mercenary army. Miltiades allied himself with Ariobarzanes, the satrap of Phrygia, who was in revolt along with other satraps against the king of kings, Artaxerxes II. Both Miltiades and Cotys requested help from Athens. The Athenians were outraged by the loss of their allied cities to the Thracians, yet they had to choose a side, hoping to secure the return of the Greek cities from the victor. Miltiades made the decision easier. As Cotys marched into the Chersonese, he handed over the cities to his Persian ally in exchange for immediate military assistance. The Athenians, led by Iphicrates, joined Cotys, and a series of battles ensued, including one naval engagement in which Iphicrates saved Cotys' life. Eventually, in 369, Miltiades' army was defeated and he briefly disappeared from the historical record. Cotys then ordered Iphicrates to conquer the Greek cities on his behalf, but Iphicrates refused to attack Athenian allies. In response, Cotys removed him from command and hired Haridemus, another Athenian general who was more than willing to carry out the campaign. In order to secure his loyalty, Cotys married him to one of his daughters. Cotys was determined to capture the cities of Sestos and Krithote from Ariobarzanes and secured an alliance with Autophrodatus, the satrap of Lydia. In response, Ariobarzanes requested assistance from both Athens and Sparta, and they agreed to send commanders with contingents. While Autophrodatus eventually withdrew, Cotys managed to take Sestos in 360 BC. The entire Thracian campaign was humiliating for Athens, which later prosecuted its generals for their failures. With Sestos under Thracian control, the Athenians faced the serious threat of losing access to grain from the Greek cities on the Black Sea. Emboldened by his victories, Cotys ordered Herodotus to besiege the cities of Krithote and Elaeus. At the same time, he formed alliances with the Illyrians and Paeonians with the aim of invading Macedonia. However, soon after, Cotys was assassinated, either by his brothers or by two Thracians bribed by the Athenians. After the death of Cotys, Krasopoulis ascended the Odrysian throne. Athens dispatched a fleet to attack him, but Krasopoulis countered by sending Herodotus, who successfully repelled the Athenians with his combined Greek and Thracian forces. Meanwhile, Miltiades attempted to regain power by raising a mercenary army, but he was ultimately defeated and killed by Herodotus. Not long after though, Krasopoulis' brothers Amadocus and Berisades rebelled and established their own kingdoms. In 359 BC, Philip II became the new king of Macedonia. Cunning, charismatic, and politically astute, Philip transformed his kingdom through diplomatic skill, administrative reform, and most importantly, a complete reorganization of the Macedonian army. At the same time, Thrace was in turmoil as the three brothers fought each other and simultaneously waged war against Athens. This conflict ended in 357 BC, when all three Thracian kings made peace with Athens. The ensuing peace brought a brief period of stability. A few years after the war, King Berisades died, and his son Ketriporus succeeded him. Alarmed by Macedonia's growing power, Athens formed an alliance with Ketriporus, joined by several Paeonian and Illyrian tribes. Philip swiftly crushed this coalition in battle, seizing control of the rich gold and silver mines of Mount Pangaean. The exploitation of the mines financed Philip's campaigns. Through a combination of conquest and political maneuvering, he subdued and eventually annexed the territories of the Thracian kings and founded new cities in order to establish Macedonian presence. Krasopoulis, the last Thracian ruler to resist him, was compelled into an alliance after Philip captured his son. He later rebelled once more, but was defeated and killed in 343 BC. By 341, Philip had formally annexed his kingdom, bringing nearly all of Thrace under Macedonian rule. Subsequently, Philip campaigned against the Scythians to the north and was wounded by a Tribalian raid on his journey home. Around this period, he married Meda of Odyssos, daughter of Cothelus, king of the Getae. Upon Philip's assassination in 336 BC, the Thracian tribes rebelled against his son, Alexander the Great, and conspired with the Tribali and the Illyrians to invade Macedonia. Acting swiftly, Alexander marched into Thrace, crossed the mountain tribes, and defeated the Tribali after fierce fighting near the river Linginus. Crossing the Danube by night, he launched a surprise attack on the Getae, subduing them as well. After this campaign, the Thracians, Paeonians, Tribali, and Getae were compelled to supply troops to Alexander's army for his eastern campaigns. The Thracians, particularly the Odrysians, and the Paeonians, especially the elite Agrianes, proved to be exceptional warriors, fighting valiantly in every major campaign from Greece to India. In 330 BC, a major revolt broke out in Thrace, but was swiftly suppressed by Antipater, one of Alexander's generals. In 325, the Macedonian governor Zopyrion undertook a campaign against the Getae and Scythians, which ended in total disaster. His army was annihilated, and he was killed in combat. The resulting instability in the region enabled the Odrysian chieftain Seuthes III to rebel and restore the Odrysian kingdom. After the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC, his vast empire was divided among his generals, and the Wars of the Diadochi ensued. One of these generals, Lysimachus, a Thessalian Greek, took control of Thrace. He established his capital at Lysimachia on the Chersonese Peninsula and fought continuously against Seuthes, the Getae, and the Scythians for dominance in the region. Despite frequent conflicts, Seuthes managed to maintain his kingdom. Inspired by the example of Hellenistic monarchs, he decided to build his own city, which he named Scythopolis. Until that time, the Adrician kings had ruled from Thyrsus, which were temporary encampments set up wherever the king travelled. This was the first major permanent settlement created by the Thracians. However, it served more as a royal residence for the king, his court, and a number of soldiers than as a large, thriving Hellenistic city. To construct Scythopolis, Seuthes hired skilled Greek architects and craftsmen. Today, the ruins of Scythopolis lie beneath the waters of an artificial lake following the construction of a dam in the 1950s. In recent years, plans have emerged to recover and preserve the site, envisioning a unique archaeological attraction accessible by boat. During the wars of the Diadochi and throughout much of the Hellenistic period, thousands of Thracian warriors served as mercenaries for the various generals and kings who had divided Alexander's empire. The restored Adrician kingdom in Thrace endured only briefly before a powerful new threat arose in the early 3rd century BC. Throughout the previous century, various Celtic tribes began migrating from Central Europe into the northern Balkans along the Danube River. In the early 3rd century, hundreds of thousands of Celts poured into the Balkans, raiding and plundering countless settlements. In Thrace, they burned Scythopolis in 279, forcing the Thracian aristocracy to flee and causing the fragmentation of the Adrician kingdom. The Celts established their own kingdom in Thrace, with its capital at Tilis. In 277, the Macedonian king Antigonus II Gonatas defeated them decisively at the Battle of Lysimachia, where 18,000 Celtic warriors were killed. Despite this crushing defeat, the weakened Celtic kingdom survived for several more decades, until it was finally destroyed by the Thracians in 213 BC. The Celts left a lasting mark on Thrace. This is evident in the region's archaeological record, where Thracian elites adopted Celtic-style burial practices and adorned themselves with a distinctive gold torques, emblematic of Celtic nobility. Throughout the 3rd century BC, Thrace was the scene of brutal conflicts involving the Thracian tribes, the Seleucid Empire, and the Antigonid Kingdom, all competing for control of the region. By the late 3rd century BC, Rome had successfully established its presence in the Balkans and had begun expanding eastward. The Greek city-states and Hellenistic kingdoms suffered a series of defeats at the hands of the Romans, and eventually the kingdom closest to the Thracians, Macedonia, fell in 168 BC, along with much of the Aegean Thracian coastline. At that time, Thrace was divided among several kingdoms ruled by chieftains. Over the next 2 centuries, Rome maintained relationships with some of these chieftains as client kings, while others resisted Roman influence. Numerous revolts occurred during this period, but all were ultimately suppressed, further strengthening Rome's presence in the region. By the 1st century AD, Roman clientship in Thrace had come to an end. Thrace was annexed and the provinces of Thracia and Moesia were officially established. Many Thracians had already undergone significant Hellenization by this time, and now began a gradual process of Romanization. Although the Thracians retained many of their traditions, especially those living in the mountains, they became increasingly Greco-Roman in language, religion, and daily life. The landscape of Thrace filled with Roman villas and newly founded cities, drawing people from rural areas and accelerating cultural assimilation. Thrace would become a vital province of the Roman Empire, producing notable generals and emperors in the 3rd and 4th centuries. After the empire's adoption of Christianity, and with Thrace located near the new imperial capital of Constantinople, the region was rapidly Christianized. In the following centuries, Thrace faced 2 major waves of migration and invasion. The first came with the Slavs, whose large-scale settlement introduced significant cultural and linguistic influences. The second wave was that of the Bulgars, a Turkic semi-nomadic people who, though fewer in number, founded their own kingdom and gradually assimilated with the local population. Together, these groups reshaped the ethnic and cultural landscape of Thrace. By the 10th century, the Thracian language and the last remnants of indigenous paganism had disappeared. The region's inhabitants were Orthodox Christians who spoke either Slavic or Greek. Our knowledge of Thracian religion is fragmentary and primarily indirect, as the Thracians left no written records. What we understand comes largely from Greek and Roman authors, supplemented by archaeological discoveries. Thracian religious practice was highly localized, with many deities tied to specific regions, tribes, or natural features such as rivers, mountains, and forests. Among the most important gods were Zalmoxis, associated with healing and immortality, Kandaunos, a warrior god associated with wolves and martial prowess, and Bendis, a mother goddess and huntress. Another significant figure was the Thracian horseman, an equestrian deity or legendary hero whose depictions resemble the Greek hero Bellerophon. Animals such as horses, wild boars, deer, wolves, and bears were symbols of divine power and protection. The practice of equating foreign deities with Greek gods profoundly influenced how Thracian religion has been historically understood. In the Greek sources, Kandaunos was associated with Ares, the Greek god of war, and Bendis was associated with Artemis, the Greek goddess of the hunt. This process, while providing a framework for Greek observers to comprehend Thracian divinities, complicates modern reconstructions of the indigenous Thracian pantheon. Other Thracian deities include Kotito, worshipped along the Aegean coast, and an unnamed god whom Greeks equated with Hermes. Herodotus reports that chieftains venerated him as a divine ancestor. A Dionysian-like god was widely worshipped, likely connected to ecstatic ceremonies and rituals. Sabazius, a god that is believed to have originated in Phrygia, was also worshipped in Thrace, at least during the Roman period. Thracian religion was mostly uniconic, with their gods rarely, if ever, depicted in physical form. Evidence suggests that certain gods were thought to dwell in the celestial realm. For instance, a story recounts a chieftain angered by his people, claiming he would climb a ladder to petition a goddess the Greeks identified as Hera. Unlike the Greeks, who often envisioned the afterlife as a shadowy and gloomy existence, the Thracians appear to have believed in a serene afterlife, where individuals would arrive with their own bodies rather than as souls or spectral forms. Thracian religious beliefs would ultimately influence the Greeks. Certain deities and practices, such as the worship of Kotito, were adopted by the Greek cities in Thrace. Additionally, ancient sources tell us that the growing Thracian presence in Athens led to the establishment of a local cult dedicated to Bendis, whose festival was one of the most beautiful and extravagant in the city. Over time, the worship of Bendis spread throughout Greece. During the Hellenistic period, Thracians increasingly adopted the worship of Greek gods. This process began among the elite, but gradually extended to the wider population. Some of the resulting deities were syncretic gods with both Thracian and Greek traits. In Greek mythology, there was a legendary poet and musician named Orpheus, whom the Greeks believed to have originated from Thrace. However, there is no evidence that the Thracians themselves worshipped or were even aware of a poet named Orpheus, though the Greeks acknowledged the Thracians as very skilled singers. Later, a religious movement known as Orphism emerged, in which Orpheus was regarded as a prophet and Dionysus as a deity of salvation who was killed by the Titans and later resurrected. These beliefs, however, appear unrelated to Thracian religion. For instance, the Orphics taught the separation of body and soul and the doctrine of reincarnation, concepts not present in Thracian religious practice. Due to the abundant gold and silver mines in the region, the people of Thrace produced and amassed a wealth of precious objects. Hundreds of treasure hoards have been excavated by archaeologists, some tracing back to the Bronze Age, like the Volchitron treasure, a collection of gold vessels dating to around 1300 BC. During the early Iron Age, Thracian pottery, metalwork, and royal insignia, such as fibulae and ritual axes, showed strong influences from Greece and Anatolia. Between 525 and 280 BC, Thracian art reached its peak. Greek colonies along the coast and contact with the Persian East introduced new techniques, inspiring Thracian artisans to produce sophisticated jewelry, pottery, and ritual objects. The vast majority of the excavated treasure hoards date to this period. Among the most famous is the Panagiouriste treasure, dating to the 4th or 3rd century BC. It comprises 9 intricately crafted gold vessels, including 7 rhytons, a fiali, and an amphora, likely produced in Lampsacus, a Greek city in western Anatolia. The Borovo treasure, created in the early to mid-4th century BC, consists of 5 silver-gilt vessels, including 3 rhytons, a boar, and a vase. The Lukovid treasure, also from the 4th century BC, includes silver and partially gold-gilded drinking vessels, plates, and horse bridle decorations featuring various motifs. Another monumental find, the Rogozan treasure, dated to the 5th or 4th century BC, comprises 165 silver objects, many gilded with gold, depicting animals, mythological beings, heroes, and deities. Aside from their treasure hoards, Thracian tombs contain remarkable works of art. One of Bulgaria's most famous archaeological sites is located in the heart of the Balkan mountains. Known as the Valley of the Thracian Kings, the area is dotted with numerous mounds and tumuli. It was here that the ancient city of Sothopolis was built. Among the most monumental tombs and of particular interest in artwork is the Kazanlak tomb and the tomb of Seuthes III. The first one is a vaulted brick Tholos tomb depicting a couple receiving gifts and a chariot race. Archaeologists have also uncovered vessels and various artifacts within it. The second one is a stone vaulted tomb with several unique characteristics, like the marble doors at its entrance. Excavations revealed Seuthes' armor, weapons, and wine-filled vessels. It also contained a famous sculpture of Seuthes' head, created by Silanion, the most famous Greek sculptor of the time. Aside from the artworks found in Thrace, it would be interesting to explore the depiction of Thracians in Greek art, particularly on Athenian pottery. These portrayals offer a glimpse into Thracian culture during the 6th and 5th centuries BC. They provide detailed depictions of the famous Crescent shields as well as the distinctive Thracian cloak, which was also worn by Thessalian Greeks. Perhaps most intriguingly, the vases confirm what many Greek authors noted. Thracian women, and to a lesser extent men, often tattooed their bodies with geometric motifs and depictions of animals. The ancient authors described the Thracians as a warlike nation. Their warfare reflected a fiercely independent and tribal society, where loyalty to kin and clan formed the backbone of military cohesion. Because their armies were organized along tribal lines, central command was often limited, making Thracian forces highly effective in skirmishes and opportunistic engagements, but less reliable in tightly coordinated operations, with some exceptions, of course. Thracian armies typically consisted of a mix of infantry and cavalry, with horse riding being central to the culture, particularly among the tribes that inhabited the plains. Although cavalry often formed a smaller proportion of the army, it was feared for its speed and shock value. Light cavalry were generally unarmored and armed with javelins and curved swords. Heavy cavalry wore armor similar to that of the Scythians and to a lesser extent Greek hoplites. By the 4th century BC, the cavalry had incorporated additional equipment, including shields, spurs, saddles, and lances. Thracian infantry included javelin men, archers, and slingers. The most distinctive infantry type were the pelters. Armed with a light wicker shield called pelter, javelins, and a small sidearm, a pelters excelled in ambushes, hit-and-run tactics, and combat in difficult terrain. During the Hellenistic period, lightly armored troops such as the Thurophori and Thoracitae emerged, carrying longer spears and larger shields. Thracian forces employed a wide array of weapons. Swords included the akinagis, kopis, sika, and the feared rhomphaia, a two-handed sword capable of delivering devastating blows. Spears and javelins were common, with long spears sometimes featuring bronze counterweights for stability. While archery was often a symbol of royal status among northern Thracians, it was less prominent in battle. Slings and staff slings, however, were commonly used, particularly in sieges. Protective equipment among Thracians varied according to social status and tribal tradition. Helmets included Halkidian, Thracian, and Scythian styles, often modified for cavalry and sometimes adorned with silver and gold. Body armor was generally reserved for nobles or commanders, while lighter troops used minimal protection, or none at all. Shields evolved from the small pelter to larger types, allowing soldiers to balance defense with mobility. Though the Thracians left no written legacy, their rich art, elaborate tombs, and the accounts of contemporary foreign authors reveal a hardy and proud people that inspire a great sense of mystery. Their influence on ancient warfare and religion stands as a lasting testament to their place in history.